what are your thoughts about the situation at Harvard, ma'am?
Well, look, I think whenever we talk about Chinese Communist Party foreign infiltration ops, there's obviously a lot of focus on how they try to abstain from things turning kinetic, because they say if you turn it kinetic, you've essentially already lost. But I think what the important part is, what you're really getting at, what I think we're seeing going on, or at least what we saw at the southern border, and even today I'd flag what's going on in the South China Sea, right? China planting a flag on a Philippine island, just a dispute going on there. I believe Sandy Cay is the name of it. But you're seeing this fusion, I think, between their sort of typical tactics when it comes to the theaters of war, right? More in the information, economic, psychological lawfare. That's, of course, their three warfares doctrine. But you're almost seeing this convergence of it becoming kinetic in this sort of roundabout way. And Harvard, I think, is a perfect example of how the American people, it's not just that they're being misled, but they're being intentionally, I think, deceived, not exactly by the Chinese Communist Party, but by the American experts that they're sort of propping up. They have a name for it. It's called the borrowed boat strategy, but they like to launder their narratives, their talking points through Westerners, through trusted American, shall I say, media outlets like the ones that I'm standing by. But Harvard is a perfect example as at least in the CCP worldview, of being an elite institution carrying some weight, some class in terms of influencing American political discourse. They have collaborated with one of the premier United Front Work Department organizations by the name of the China United States Exchange Foundation. Now, the United Front Work Department is the very systematic and calculated political warfare operation that emanates out of Beijing to the tune of billions of dollars. Think Hunter Biden, but on an industrial scale. And I know we like to talk about a lot of these universities collaborating with the Chinese Communist Party like it's a thing of the past, right? The Confucius Institutes were shuttered under President Trump. They still have the CSSAs, that's the Chinese Students and Scholars Association, which is where there's more direct espionage efforts going on. But just 2 weeks ago, if you can believe it, Harvard and actually Columbia were having their sort of annual China conference. It's the Harvard College China Conference. It was April 14th. And guess who not only what their closing speaker was, but who their main partner in terms of sponsoring this event was? None other than CUSEF. Now, just to go back real quick, CUSEF has a very long pattern of collaborating, particularly with Harvard, also UChicago, a lot of America's top universities, in terms of flying students overseas, training them, having them meet, in some cases even with PLA officials, touring Huawei offices, meeting with sanctioned companies like Hikvision, Huawei, DJI drones. It really is a horrible program and tactic that they use to co-opt a lot of these Western elites. But I think the important point is that in the same, world in which our taxpayer dollars are going to subsidize Harvard University, they're concurrently taking billions of dollars, and the disclosure is such that you'll never really know. It's sort of the, counter to, I guess, the Act Blue dark money, but it's by design. But the Chinese Communist Party is still, as of 2 weeks ago, publicly sponsoring events with Harvard College, and they also do the Harvard Kennedy School Conference too, but it's so blatantly in your face. And frankly, Steve, the buried lead is that it's so in your face. That means that they know they've bought off the upper echelons of the United States, of our society, that they can get away with doing it.
No, when I talk about banning the students, Harvard's addicted to two things, maybe three things, but definitely two things. U.S. federal taxpayer money to keep different programs going. Chinese Communist Party massive infusion of cash, right, for programs, and probably Qatar. I sent you that piece today. There's a study out that says, is it $29 billion the Chinese Communist Party and Qatar alone, those two have put with major U.S. universities? Our universities that used to be some of the most cherished institutions in our countries are no longer American institutions. This is why at Columbia you had 60% foreign students. That stuff's got to end. Federal money's got to stop right now. They got to purge these faculties. They got to purge and anybody that's a collaborator with the Chinese Communist Party's got to go. All the kids, and some of these kids are innocent, the Chinese national kids, but right now, while they got to sign that pledge that they have to report every 30 days, for right now, they got to go, all of them. And you got to open those slots up for American kids. We got to cut the money off from the Chinese Communist Party. We're in an economic war with them right now. That sandbar that people, the mainstream, it's just a sandbar. They are laying a stake to one of the islands as small as Azores or Atoll to make a statement against the Philippines that they're in charge of the South China Sea. And you got the nine-dotted map or chart that shows it's an inland sea to mainland China. This thing's rolling hard. And President Trump, you said it perfectly, the Sun Tzu part, if they have to go kinetic, they think they've lost, so they're going to do everything else except kinetic. And the thing they do most is that they know the foreign leaders can be bribed and bought off. Natalie, it's a pretty sorry state of affairs. Not only are the American elites can be bought off, they can be bought off pretty cheaply, can they not, ma'am?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole Confucius Institute issue is sort of the limited hangout version in terms of what is going on these college campuses. But I think if you even extrapolate more broadly what you're talking about, which I agree, we've been at economic war with them, if not, I would say veering into the territory of kinetic warfare for a very long time. But even if you take away, if you say, okay, maybe these students aren't affiliated directly with the Chinese Communist Party, but table that for a second, we still shouldn't be educating and training and imparting, let alone a country with a history, and repeated history at that, of intellectual property theft and industrial espionage, with the secrets, with the trades, with industry, with tips, with the brightest, though I don't know if the professors at Harvard are necessarily the brightest, but we should not be educating the very people who will then be competing with American companies, maybe in the boardrooms, but also maybe when it comes to a battlefield. And to that point, I think people don't understand that what the Chinese Communist Party is doing in every facet of American society. I mean, to call it war is an understatement. If you read their military doctrine, which people recall, this is what I got my start in terms of the investigative reporting, they have very, very calculated, the most heavily cited quote throughout their military doctrine is to subdue, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. And that three warfares doctrine that I was talking about, it's psychological warfare, media warfare, and lawfare. And all of that together is how China has, I would argue, essentially taken over at least the Achilles heel of the United States, which is our ruling class. But I just don't think that the people who are messaging on China, right, in the legacy media, they will never understand the threat, partly because they're paid off, and we've exposed time and time again the trips that they've paid to take these journalists on in exchange for favorable coverage. But the key point that I would make, too, for anyone who thinks it's so imperative that we somehow replace the people who are going to, replace your children or eventually go to war with us, any company, any business, any person, anybody who is even tangentially linked to China is Chinese to the Chinese Communist Party. They're subject to Article 7 of China's National Intelligence Law, which stipulates that at any moment, for any purpose, for any reason, very broad scope there, under essentially any purview, they can be requisitioned by the state, by China's Ministry of Intelligence, by their spy services, to do whatever the Chinese Communist Party can please. And if you know that that's a thing, I have no idea why you would be importing to the tune of hundreds of thousands of foreign students onto these college campuses where you see it time and time again. People being indicted, arrested for stealing research secrets, for not disclosing that they're being funded by the Chinese Communist Party. And your previous guest, Robert O'Brien, what he really did that was so revolutionary during Trump 1 was that he really focused on enforcing FARA and overhauling that and using that as sort of a touchstone, or at least a guiding light, to go after what are the, as we speak, active 200 plus registered foreign agents on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. When we talk about the lobbying firms and the law firms, part of the way that China has been able to co-opt this city is that explicitly tied to whether it's Beijing Municipal Services or Shanghai, name your city. These cities will retain Western law firms or lobbying firms, the ones on K Street that I'm not too far from, and they'll lobby for them for sort of, meaningless, paltry issues. But the real point is that they're on the payroll. Not only are they probably hacking all their devices, but they are then, for all the rest of the American and Western corporate clients that they're working on behalf of, they're not going to compromise or come after the clients who are also paying them. I think one of the most staggering and stunning statistics from the entirety of Trump 1 was when they classified, it was over, I believe, 25 Chinese companies as military collaborators, which, military civil fusion, it's not just an industry thing, it's a science thing. We know the Wuhan Institute of Virology. But of those 25 companies, 4 or 5 of them had active Western lobbyists working on their behalf, trying to get them government contracts, trying to, protect their image in the Western press. If you extrapolate that out to every Chinese company, that's extremely damaging. But all of this stuff is very well rehearsed, and I think that most people are really naive.
Hang on. I want to make sure that the audience gets a full impact of this. They're lobbying to get U.S. government contracts. Think about that for a second, folks. As if your pension fund hasn't been the private equity and hedge fund money that shipped the jobs over there, that your tax money is not keeping this madness going, that they have retained lobbyists to get government defense contracts. I mean, it's insane. You can't say, I mean, they're at a war with us. They must think we're idiots. We fund it, we let them steal the technology, or we train them up in it, or we just look the other way if our companies, to get access to their market, have to form joint ventures. The first thing they have to dump in is their intellectual property. I mean, it's open season on the Americans. Explain, just as a tutorial, just go back. Explain to folks, when you say a united front entity or a united front effort, what does united front mean?
Sure. So this is actually a branch. It's led by the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. So this group oversees their foreign outreach efforts, not just limited to the United States and not even limited to the Western world. It's sort of, I would say, the political institutionalization of what they attempted to do with the Belt and Road, right? The 140 plus countries that signed on to that. That was using infrastructure and ports as leverage. The United Front Work Department uses business deals, putting spouses on the payroll. In some cases, blackmail, trips to China. But a lot of these very euphemistic sounding organizations, a lot of various city level Federation for Returned Chinese overseas, the whole Sister Cities scam, the Chinese Association for International and Friendly Contact, the Chinese People's Association for Foreign Contact. They have these very innocuous but funny sounding names, but they're very calculated. And I would say, just my overview, having tracked this stuff, people can probably tell I geek out on this, but in the early 2000s, like after they joined the WTO and were really focusing on the economic warfare stuff, they were very content, I would argue, with just sort of shaping and astroturfing the narrative about what exactly constituted China's rise. And they wanted China to be looked at by the rest of the world as a model, you know, that they were a great country. They lifted all these people out of poverty. But post-Trump entering office, maybe even a little before that, I think that the influence ops sort of shifted where they were no longer content just shaping the narratives around China. But that was when you really saw them, I think, start to do the more cultural subversion stuff here in the West. And that's when you really get into the, you know, fifth dimension, fifth kind of generation warfare, where by having, you know, by co-opting politicians who will push for immigration policies that leads to an open border, you then allow military-aged Chinese males with ties to the PLA to enter your country through that porous border. When you have lax politicians who won't enforce agricultural laws, that's how you see China buying up farmland. That's how you see politicians who won't call out Chinese spy balloons. That's how you co-opt an entire scientific community to give our tax dollars to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That's how, you know, and the list goes on, right? Take your pick. Hollywood's a perfect example of that. And academia, going back to Harvard, is also a perfect example of that, because, you know, all of these stupid research papers and white papers that they put out, there's no meaning to them. It's not like these researchers are sitting around wanting to write, you know, dozens of pages about useless woke stuff. Those are then used to lobby members of Congress to adopt certain positions. And when the Harvard Ash Center is literally being funded by Chinese Communist Party owned enterprises, and in some cases, I mean, Xi Jinping's daughter lives in Boston and goes to Harvard. You know what I mean? It's absurd. The level of compromise, but the boldness of it shows you how deeply embedded they actually are. I mean, there's a person who is right now a professor emeritus or whatever at the Naval War College who I exposed years ago for visiting and going to the Shanghai Academy for Social Sciences, which our own intelligence services have flagged as being the hotbed for how the Chinese Communist Party flags and finds Western spies who will leak documents to them. And we've seen several CIA people leak documents. They have established channels. So if a stupid, you know, naval war professor is able to do that, and Naval War College was able to do that and get away with it, this goes all the way to the top of society. The idea that this is just, you know, Western greed and lust for the Chinese market, that's part of it. Maybe that works with Mark Zuckerberg, though I'd argue he's compromised too. But this is very, very, very calculated. It's why I was able to have the investigative career that I had at the age of 19, because there was so much to report on that no one ever wanted to get into because they were bought off and paid for by them.
Given your professional expertise, what do you think it's going to take to put a blowtorch to this and to rid Harvard of this bacillus, ma'am?
So I would start by Congress subpoenaing every Western lobbying firm that has worked on behalf of a Chinese Communist Party linked company, to get all the documents, to get the names of the people that they collaborated with, the journalists that went on these trips, the think tankers, the students. Just get the names first. And then from there, I think you can kind of reverse engineer who's up to no good. But I would have a zero tolerance policy for a lot of these people who have any affiliation with these Chinese Communist Party United Front Work Department groups. The CCP is, I always described as radioactive. They're toxic. Once you are awash in their influence ops, you don't escape. I also think that I would say I maybe perhaps disagree with DOJ's decision to water down some of the FARA registration. I actually think FARA is an important statute. I don't necessarily think that what it currently is all that great. I would have reformed it before getting it out, but I think that they should more intensely enforce FARA operations and make these universities have to disclose their funding. I think that first and foremost, and have them make the case to the American people why they're taking and actually, believe it or not, training leaders from the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps, which has orchestrated the entire Uyghur genocide. Harvard actually has a special program where they used to invite them over here. They would bring them, they'd let them tour the Capitol and have them meet with members of Congress and instruct them how to be better and more efficient politicians. I'm not kidding.
I don't know about the audience, but I'm all set to say that I think Natalie is ready to go into a cabinet position, or at least an